Someone asked me what would be my response to RFK Jr.'s speech on autism. I wanted to give some thought and some time as a Black therapist who's been in this space of working with children for 20 years, as an aunt to an autistic nephew, as a professional in this space. I wanted to take my time as I answered this. So let me first start with what is right about what he said. And folks, bear with me because I got my paper here, I've got a lot of notes, and I just want to speak from my heart if that's okay. So we are seeing an increase. I can tell you as a therapist working with children for 20 years, I have seen an increase in neurodiversity. And when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about just the differences that the normal brain has and what that could look like. In our mental health criteria, when we talk about ADHD or anxiety or dyslexia, some of the things that fall under that neurodiversity umbrella, we are seeing an increase. I used to say that most students coming in may be ADHD, anxiety, depression. Here in New Jersey, our rates are higher when it comes to autism diagnoses. And yes, we are seeing those numbers 1 in 31. Most 8-year-olds that are coming into my practice actually have an autism diagnosis. So I do agree with that. I do agree with the fact that we are getting better at screening and we are able to understand it. When I first started graduate school, all I understood about autism was that yes, they're nonverbal, they're head banging, and if they're speaking, sitting in front of you at 8 years old, they cannot be autistic. Well, that has definitely changed. And now what we're understanding that neurodiversity also means that more intellect, right? We're seeing individuals, a lot of our autistic people, again, it's a spectrum disorder, have high IQ, are intelligent, are at university settings, are maintaining jobs. While we also have individuals, again, autism is not related to IQ, but we have individuals who are nonverbal, non-speaking, who are also highly intelligent, but have a spectrum disorder and their limitations look different. I do agree with RFK when he talks about the literature looking at that 25% being nonverbal. We are seeing that shift. I'm working with more speaking autistic individuals who are in general education classes. Maybe they have an IEP, maybe they just have a 504, but we are changing what autism looks like by talking about those differences, nonverbal versus speaking. They are absolutely correct that in the Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities, we are seeing diagnoses, higher rates of diagnoses. One of the things my master's thesis, and again, this was about 25 years ago, but my master's thesis looked at the fact of does untreated ADHD conduct disorder and lead to adult criminal behavior. And one thing RFK, there was a question about incarcerated adults and Blacks. And I do believe that because we are still have this stigma in communities of color around mental health, we have misdiagnosed people. We have missed the opportunity to look at that. I am seeing more educated professionals, individuals of color in spaces saying, hey, now that mental health is more understandable, we understand that we should get our children screened. I am seeing more people come in, and we are seeing those diagnosis rates go up in our communities. I do agree that we do need to focus on the fact that these rates are increasing, and what does that mean for our communities, for our families. I agree that when we look at the fact that children are invisible, autistic diagnoses have gone under the radar in educational settings, in therapy settings. Many clinicians cannot diagnose autism. They're not trained. I personally have done the ADOS training. I've done certificate trainings, making sure that I've had the latest information on understanding autism diagnosis. But that's just my commitment to the space because, again, I have an autistic nephew and I want to be able to support our family with the resources and the tools. But many clinicians in their master's programs, we have abnormal psychology, we talk about psychopathology, but we don't specialize particularly in any specific disorder. And so that's going to come after graduate school. That's going to come from the heart of the therapist and their population that they work with. So it is important to recognize that not all therapists would be able to recognize and screen for autism, and they should be referring students out when they suspect autism is present. I do agree with RFK that we are in denial. I work with parents all the time that even as we're sitting there talking about the ADOS screening, talking about the diagnosis, and parents are saying, not my child. Schools will say, well, I don't think that's a diagnosis, or pediatricians not being aware. We have to turn the conversation. So I do agree with the focus and the emphasis on autism and looking at the rates and trying to understand the why. Now, at the end of this, I'll tell you the things I disagree with him on, but I want to kind of stay in the strength base for a moment. It is costing our families. I work with families, and I'm not going to use the word devastated. I'm working with families who have a different parenting experience in raising an autistic child. There are differences that, again, whether it's sensory differences, language differences, sensory differences, all of these things that impact just the everyday parenting, that becomes difficult. I do agree with RFK when he says, let's look at what happens. We do find that over the age of 18, many of our autistic students are struggling in academic settings. About 70% of autistic students that try to attempt college actually drop out of college. We do have high percentages of autistic people who are unable to maintain employment. And that is a crisis, and that is something that we need more support around. If you're a small business, for example, how can you employ autistic individuals to help them to gain gainful employment, understanding their differences? Autistic individuals have a hard time with schedules and coming to work. Some of them love routine, love schedule, and need it. Again, it's a spectrum disorder, but the employability and the challenges that we're seeing in 18 and above is a real concern. The fact that some of our students who are autistic will never have experiences, RFK is accurate. There are some children that will not go to prom. They will not have experiences like being able to enjoy an Easter egg hunt or being able to have a birthday party. I remember one of my nephew's earliest birthday parties, and as we're singing happy birthday, he's covering his ears. Now he enjoys birthday parties, and again, he's able to understand them and have a great time. But there are moments and experiences because a student is autistic that their family will not have. However, that's not all of our children who are autistic. There are many children who get married. I don't think he's seen the show Love on the Spectrum. and if you've seen it, it's a great show where people, again, are exploring dating and relationships. And the key here is support. And the key here is services to help. I know there's a movement to say autistic children don't need help with social skills, and I disagree with that. All children need help with social skills because we're living in a time where there's deficits, and being able to recognize, for example, many of our autistic students, about 70 to 80% who are in public schools, end up being bullied and the target of bullying. And so teaching them to be assertive, to stand up for themselves, to be able to communicate their needs is a different spin on social skills. And when I teach social skills, that's what I mean. Not just, hi, how are you doing? But again, in those moments where we're seeing them struggle in social moments. New Jersey, I've been practicing here in New Jersey for about 20 years or a little bit over 20 years. And yes, we are seeing the rates go up. So I definitely agree with that. I do believe that it is real and it is impacting our families. I work with parents all the time who are overwhelmed. I work with families who are trying to, when they get the diagnosis, they'll go to a center, they'll get assessments, and then there's no support. How do I now, thank you for the diagnosis, but now how do I help my autistic child? And so that's where therapists like me come in, and we really help to build a network and support for families, giving them tools and resources. I've written books, I have videos, I do therapy sessions, trying to help families and supporting the parents because, again, this is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. This is not a one stamp in time. This is not something that they're going to get over. And again, I'm going to hold my things I disagree with at the end here. But I can say that we are seeing this impact families. Talking about the causes, we know a little bit about causes. And that's one thing I will say RFK's communication around the research. We do know age of parents. We do know that, again, looking at neurodiversity in families, so a family history of ADHD, mental health concerns, anxiety, for example, in moms is something that's been studied, ADHD. But all that lends to the fact is if you go back to biology 101, right, and when two people get together, I always share with parents, when two people get together, we don't know what the genetic outcome is going to be, right? It's going to be some combination of those two folks. And somewhere in there is where neurodiversity is occurring. And so the fact that we are seeing more neurodiverse people have children together can kind of explain the genetic side of it. And again, no expert on all this, but even our twin studies are looking at the fact. I work with a lot of twins, and oftentimes when one has the ASD diagnosis, the other one either has ASD or has some other type of neurodivergent diagnosis like ADHD, anxiety, learning disabilities. And so there is a genetic component there that we're seeing. When we talk about the idea, again, from maternal age to just following the science, I agree 100% that we need to have more dollars, more grants, more money looking at the causes. And I want to hope that all of this will bring us to more support and treatment for families. I love that we're all talking about this now and that this has brought autism to the front because it's needing, again, as a clinician in this space, that's been my biggest concern, that we don't have enough grants and funding. We don't have enough resources, even as a community provider, to be able to support. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk for what I think was wrong about this speech. It is not a chronic disease. It is not an infectious disease. It is a neurodevelopmental condition. And the fact that it changes around too talks about the developmental part, right? When we talk about development, it's across the lifespan. And so autistic children change, as all children do, developmentally as they age. And so again, I don't agree that there's an environmental piece. Let's see what the science tells us. I love the fact that they're going to research it and try to figure this out. But that's where I would disagree right up front. The fact that it is catastrophic to our country, I think the language was so strong. Do I feel like it is a condition that is a thing that we need to look at and say, again, how is it impacting families? 100%. And if you've ever sat with a parent, which I do all the time, around the diagnosis and what that means to them, in that moment, they grieve. They grieve a lot of the normal experiences their child will have, and they continue to grieve. I have families who don't get to experience graduation because the sensory sounds of graduation is too overwhelming and their child would not be able to sit through it. And I have children, for example, getting ready to prepare for Easter this weekend. And there are some children who cannot participate in an Easter egg hunt because of, again, the unpredictability. But there are many children on the spectrum that can and do experience great moments. And then we have to tailor those moments. So I've had schools where because the student couldn't sit through graduation, the school decided to have a smaller service for that graduation for that student. And their family was there, the principal, the administrators, and it was a smaller setting and they were able to graduate. So again, I hear the language, but I think when we talk about what we can do, it becomes more of a treatment perspective at this point, and just recognizing neurodiversity and celebrating neurodiversity, and how do we then change our systems to understand that we're seeing people that just have neurodivergent differences, and that's okay. I do not believe that the gene studies is a dead end. I think it's spot on where we need to be in research and looking at the genetic component. I do think that, again, when we talk about these individuals, RFK Jr said that they will never be able to pay taxes, play baseball. They're not able to do that because we haven't supported them. And we need to really look at how do we support individuals with autism so they can integrate into and be a part of our communities. When they talked about the fact that we don't see older autistic people, I want to argue because generations before, if you were different, we hospitalized you. We put you in institutions, and there are group homes and facilities and institutions filled with adults who may have been misdiagnosed, who have things like schizophrenia, bipolar, psychosis as a diagnosis, when really they were autistic individuals. And so I really would encourage them to look into those populations because they do exist. Other things that I disagree with, This is not a public health crisis. This is a moment in time for us to become aware of the families and the children that need our support and our care and our love. And so I'm all a fan of, again, getting information out to people, helping people to understand autism, but it starts with support and treatment now. We cannot wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I do agree with RFK Jr on that we cannot continue to just say it is because of more awareness. Agreed. But now we need to do more than that. I'm always saying to families, it's great that you're aware, but how do you support? How do we treat? How do we, and I say treat in the sense of being able to provide a wraparound model, not that these kids need to be changed, not that we need to ostracize them or treat them differently. But here's again, my heart is if we know there's no differences, just like a kid with ADHD, I'm going to support them with an IEP so that they can learn. I'm going to support them possibly with medication to help with focus. I'm going to support them with proper education, academic skills and training for executive functioning. That's the same thing we need to do with autism. We recognize it's here. We need to be able to say, okay, what are the treatment approaches that work? What's effective? Many of our speaking students benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy, problem-solving treatment approaches. They benefit from social skills and support. They benefit from being able to have supportive learning environments in the classroom. IEPs, 504s that are supportive, that keeps them in general education, honors classes, in with regular students. So again, we're not saying that this is something where we have to change the individual. When I talk about treatment, I'm looking at the idea of supporting them just the way they are. I truly believe that autistic students were made and designed by a God for a reason, the way that they are. So we're not trying to change them. They were made well. We just want to support them. So folks, I appreciate you if you've gotten this far in this video. I am Dr. Stacey Haynes. I do work with autistic children and families. My heart is just to share again right now a response, and it was requested of me. So please share this video. I am on TikTok, Instagram, all the socials if you want to follow me. I try to help and support families. I do have a book called I'm a Vibes Kid, which is a book for young people talking about their social challenges and helping them to navigate their day-to-day. Again, the reality is that the autism is something that is here. It is a beautiful understanding when you understand these kids and how they navigate the world and how they move through their spaces. But we do need to provide their parents with a lot of support and resources so that their kids can thrive and be the best possible part of our society. And so I just appreciate you all so much. Thanks.